Welcome, everybody, to the Modern CFO show, where we sit down with some of the best and brightest minds in finance to share their experiences and lesson learned. Today, with me is Philip Kean from Gate Advisory. Philip, thank you so much for joining me. Could you kindly just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your company, your services, and what you do?
Sure, yeah. Philip Kean. I run Gate Advisory out of New York here in the US. We're a full services fractional CFO firm servicing predominantly early to mid stage companies in the tech ecosphere, a lot of SaaS, a lot of fintech, a bit of prop tech as well. And we also do Treasury as a service for later stage and public companies. We've been doing this for 2.5 years. Before I started Lane Gate, I was the global treasurer and head of FP&A at UiPath, which is a robotics process automation company, which we took public in 2020.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the explanation. I know you've got a wide range of customer base and a lot of experience as a CFO, so we're looking forward to picking your brains about a bunch of different topics. But just to kick things off, I know that you like to use a lot of kind of next gen FinOps tools, if we was to say, that you feel can take out your larger players, such as your NetSuites or your QuickBooks. What's your current model at the moment? What software are you using and how is it benefiting both, you and your customers?
Sure. At the lowest level, in terms of the dumbest product I use that I think is just a great tool for collaboration. And I can't believe I never would have said this 3 years ago, but it's Google Sheets. I'm a huge convert from Excel, having used Excel intimately for 20 years in my career. But I love the collaborative nature, some of the embedded intelligence, um, uh, regardless of the fact that there are a few really frustrating things about it. It's just the way you can kind of work with teams and manage product projects in a very collaborative way is awesome, and it far outweighs some of the superior product features of Excel. Beyond that, you talked about replacing something like NetSuite. There are a lot of next gen ERPs that I'm a big fan of. Couple examples are Everest Systems, Rillet, Campfire, and Puzzle. Puzzle is a little earlier stage, probably more of a replacement for QBO. But these are all ERPs that I believe you'll be able to start early stage and scale with even into a public company. They're very smart. They have embedded agentic automation. They auto tag your transactions really effectively, so your manual input is de minimis. They've got reporting specific to whatever industry you're working in. Rillet, as an example, has a lot of I work with a lot of SaaS companies. They have all of your, ARR reporting built into the system. And they're really easy to use, which you can't say about any incumbent ERP. They're almost a pleasure, I would say. So I know another fractional CFO that has 10 clients on Rillet. That's inclusive of Series C clients with hundreds of employees. And he's closing all 10 of those clients on the first day of the month with only a single accounting resource helping him out.
Wow.
You can't, to do that for one company on NetSuite is a huge challenge because, a lot of these older ERPs, they do one thing and they do it kind of well. And then they have reliance on this kind of Frankenstein, stack of like additional ancillary services like your black lines, your Karibas, um, and none of them really speak together, speak with each other that well. And it's, you've got this just like clunky old system. These new ERPs, they're trying to do all of it in one system, and they're smart enough to help you manage that close process without you having to develop a whole bunch of extra tools to help you get there. And then another tool I really love is called Tabs. Tabs is revenue automation. So it starts from the point of landing a customer through to RevRec, and that's inclusive of collections and AR, and that links into all of your older ERPs as well as some of the newer ones. Um, that's really cool. You effectively like load your customer contracts. It digests them for you. It tells you what your cash forecast is. You can bill your customers directly through the system. You get Slack, real-time Slack updates with the customer journey. It'll do your revenue recognition and throw that into whatever ERP you're using. Just a lot of stuff that, companies would have spent, days doing every week, or even having like a dedicated resource. These tools are just really effective at doing that with pretty minimal human intervention. It's a big list. Like that you could go on and on and on. There's other tools. I'm working with a company called Maximore right now, which is it's like an agentic AI overlay for these older, clunkier, sticky ERPs. So you would like, let's say you're you know middle stage company, you've got like 2,000 employees, you've been on NetSuite for 5 years, and you use like 10 other bits of software in your finance stack. Maximore just sits on top of all of that and consolidates it into one view, and manages the close process for you. There'll be another cool one next week and the week after. They're just like they keep coming and coming and coming. So I just love. I'm not super passionate about doing mundane operational finance work. I actually kind of hate it. Anytime a new tool comes along that can do that, but also add some cost savings, it's like kind of a double whammy, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think like especially if you're kind of tech savvy anyway, sometimes it's a hobby trying to look at these new ERPs. And I think it's important to stay on top of what's out there, right? Because I think the CFO role and the finance role is changing. So there's always going to be new tech and new software for you to update your playbook with and update your skill set. So it's always something to look out for. I've not heard of
Sure.
all of those. I've heard of obviously Google Sheets, of course, and Reddit. But I think you hit the nail on the head, really. I think some of the larger software, there's a bit of a learning curve. As where some of, if you can pick one up that's really easy to use and a bit more plug and play, you can kind of allocate that to customers. They can pick it up quicker, and it's a knock-on effect from there.
Yeah, no, plug and play is a really good point of comparison because these older ERPs, just like implementing them, can take a year or more. And that's really costly. It's never done right. People kind of just give up because it's like such a frustrating process. These newer systems are, especially since they're getting in the door like at earlier stage and scaling with their clients, there's like way less configuration and implementation stuff to do.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah,
And I wanted to also ask, you part of what you do at Lane Gate is offer kind of treasury services as part of
sure.
your fractional CFO work. So, when working with your kind of larger startups, I think there's many things that often, can get swept under the rug and not seen as important. One in particular being treasury and cash management. So, from your perspective, what can be improved on this side of the business that is often overlooked?
Yeah, I would say it's not even just startups, it's public companies as well. And there are like a million reasons. Um, Oftentimes, I'll take a step back. Just anecdotally, it's an opportunity I recognized in my time acting in full-time capacities in treasury organizations for large companies. I had three engagements in a row where I was employed full-time at companies here in New York, um, where inside of the first 2 weeks of my role, I found low-hanging fruit just on execution of FX and cash allocations to pay for myself multiple times over. At UiPath, in my first 2 weeks, I found over $1 million in savings that took effectively like 2 days to implement.
Well,
Um, and it was the same in the role before that and the role before that. It's like a slightly smaller scale.
mm,
So yeah, most companies don't hire treasurers, and they don't do that because treasurers who are good are expensive. But they also don't do that because there's a deficit in their understanding of what treasury is. Um, CFOs typically come from an FP&A background and sometimes a controllership background.
Mhm.
Treasury and tax as well are kind of black boxes to them. So they don't totally understand the value of having someone who knows how to navigate like the banking ecosphere and knows how to book spot trades on FX.
Mm.
Yeah, you coming from an FX background, like that's not a hard thing to do. To
Yeah.
get have like
It's
a
not.
relationship with like a spot trader, it's like a conversation and then it's set up. Meanwhile, these companies are, for 10 years paying 2 to 3 percentage points on every single dollar that they trade in foreign currency because they're just doing a cross-border wire with their bank. Um, Even for intercompany transactions, like they could be spending $20 million, sending $20 million of flows per annum, and you're paying 3% on that. That's a lot of money. When all you actually have to do is call your bank and say, "Can I talk to your spot desk and just book a trade?" And
Yeah.
like
Hard.
bam, bam, there you go. Like so many companies don't do that. And then on like the cash management side, and that's before you even get into hedging, which is a whole nother thing. On the cash management side, they don't understand counterparty risk with banks. So it's a lot of things. It's they might be getting an okay return, but they're banking with a triple B credit bank, uh, which might fail. SVB was triple B plus, I think, when they failed. And so with Signature and a lot of these other banks, uh, that's like a real risk if they don't understand, even after all of that. And then you have other companies that, when SVB failed as an example, there's a flight to like, quality. And I put quality in quotation marks, where they put their funds with large institutions like JP Morgan, which they think is, like almost like a luxury brand in the banking space. Um, And JP Morgan will, if they don't have $500 million on their balance sheet, will give them like a 2 year out of college relationship manager and not pay any interest on their overnight funds and give them like a really terrible like money market product and not give them any advice on like how to invest in treasuries. And so you have all these companies that are either over allocated to low risk banks and not getting anything on their cash, or over allocated to high risk banks and maybe getting something on their cash. But the truth is, you can get the best of both worlds, right? You bank with the right partner who understands your credit profile, and you allocate to treasuries and other risk-free instruments through any number of tools for almost no fees. You have higher risk-free return on your cash, and you're limiting your risk of like losing your capital materially, almost eliminating your risk by
Mm.
allocating to the right instruments. Um, so yeah, those are like the two low-hanging fruits in terms of just treasury management. I'm convinced there are, tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of like risk-free funds that banks are just gobbling up from their customers because their customers are, don't know enough and aren't sophisticated enough to know that. And that's what I do with these later stage companies. I start the engagement. I say, "Where's your cash? What are you doing with it? Do you have any FX needs? Tell me about your like transaction volume." And I tell them how they're getting screwed, and I fix it for them, and then manage their cash, as a kind of an ongoing engagement.
Yeah. And also, I don't know what it's like over in the States, but you kind of hit the nail on the head there when you mentioned about JP Morgan, because I think in the UK we've got a private bank called Coots, and
Mhm.
sometimes, even the likes of myself and, other companies, is that you might go to a client that banks with Coots, and you can kind of inform them on some of the things that can be improved and changes. But the first thing they say is, "Oh, we're banking with JP Morgan, we're banking with Coots," and there's a bit of that status play that kind of comes
Yeah,
in where they're leaving so much on the table because they just want to say that they're working with this big bank. But I think, like you
it's
said,
so
there's probably
stupid.
a balance somewhere of splitting a bit of that risk, right? Maybe you can still have them there, but there's no harm in having some other solutions as well, right?
Sure. No, no, totally. It's a funny little landscape, and yeah, people just don't really get it, right? It's a very specialized area. I think people overestimate its complexity. It's really not that complicated. I mean, Treasury like can get really complicated once you start
Hmm.
like hedging profiles and you're doing like working on like connecting, global accounts to, tech systems and yeah, it can get pretty funky, but there's just a lot of like really simple things you can do to add a ton of value. Like I don't even take a treasury engagement if I can't pay for myself 5 times over in the first year.
Right.
And I get those engagements all the time. It's like it's that easy. Um, so yeah, a lot of companies would benefit from having a treasurer, but they don't really need a full-time treasurer to do all of that. They just need someone who knows what they're doing. So they'll make one of two mistakes. They just won't hire someone because it's an expensive resource and they'll just unknowingly leave a lot of money on the table, or they'll hire like a manager level treasury person who doesn't really know how to do any of that stuff anyway. So
Yeah.
I try to fill in that gap.
Well, this is it. I think we'll talk a little bit later about the benefits of the fractional space because I think that's where, you say not having a full-time CFO, but for someone that can come in and just deliver on, solutions that are needed, right? So we can definitely talk about that later, which I'd love to
Sure.
pick your brains upon. Just whilst we're on the topic of the neobanks, when you're in that space of delivering a solution, let's say you've identified a bunch of different problems, you're finding solutions from them, you're saving the company, loads of cash. At that point, how involved do you get the client for yourself? So as a fractional CFO, do you take all of that on board and kind of do that yourself? Or do you then train the team there to look out for these things and let them execute? Or is there a little bit of both?
A little bit of both for Treasury. So it'll be like an upfront heavy lift. And then I act as like a pseudo manager for the team just to make sure they continue to do things the right way on an ongoing basis. Um, and for the CFO work, I'm the CFO. So I do everything that you would expect to see from a CFO. I'm heavily involved to various capacities depending on what the engagement is and the stage of the company. Um, yeah, I mean, the engagements vary a little bit, but anything you would expect to see from a finance organization, I kind of bring that to the table for the CFO engagements.
Right, that makes sense to be able to
Yeah.
separate the two and split that. But whilst we were talking about FX and currency conversions, I think this is obviously my world, which I'm always interested to find how other CFOs do things. But like I said a bit earlier, I think it's something that's probably one of the most overlooked things in a lot of businesses that are trading 10 million a month, then are losing you know 2 to 3% on a conversion fee without even realizing it if that finance
Yeah.
team has doesn't know about the margins and how things work. So what's your how's it you go about managing currency risk for your clients to negotiate that better pricing? Will you go in and if they're with a certain bank, teach them, or go in yourself and negotiate better pricing for them? Or do you have your go-to bank relationship manager that you bring in, you look at their cost price and implement hedging? How does the currency side of things work for you?
So there's spot and then there's hedging, right? So for spot, I would never rely on one bank. I usually implement a tool called 360T or ICD. Um, they effectively make multiple banks compete against one another for pricing.
Yeah.
So stage one is always just let's get you better execution. So I'll implement that tool. I'll establish relationships with like multiple spot desks at banks that I know well. And then we'll start trading on that platform. And when banks aren't competitive, I tell them immediately they're not competitive, and usually next time around they are. So it's like a little bit of beating them up, but with a Nerf bat, not an aluminum bat. And on the hedging, that can be a pretty involved process. So I think it's hedging isn't for everyone. Um, and I usually like to stress the point that if you're not being scrutinized by like external markets on your like FX strategy, try to maybe not overcomplicate your finance org by implementing like a full on like hedging platform because you're effectively taking a bet either way, and it's kind of easy in your management financials to back out any currency impact that you want to back out. So I prefer like more like cash flow type hedging than balance sheet hedging. So if I'm working with someone who let's just say they're like a manufacturing company and they're like buying heavy equipment out of Europe or Asia or something like that. That's my preferred usage of like forward instruments is like you need to buy that in 6 months. Let's lock in the price now just so we know what the cash flow impact is going to be. But if they want to go and do a full-on comprehensive hedging profile for their kind of consolidated financials, I'll help them with that as well. That's why I did a UiPath, and I've done that at a couple of other companies.
Right.
But then it just it makes things really complicated. So they need to have an internal resource that can kind of help manage that because on the accounting side, that's just not something I have bandwidth to do or interest to do, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's kind of the more internal controller or, a team that would need to kind of manage that risk essentially. But
Mhm.
I think it's interesting actually because I think a lot of people, even that, we speak to, is that we have to kind of always mention that hedging isn't for everyone. And I think if you're the type of business, like you say, you're importers where margins are tight, you often make FX losses in the previous year, then it's something that, you need to implement. But otherwise, I think keeping it as simple as possible 90% of the time is kind of the go-to play without having to overcomplicate things, of course, right?
Totally, especially in tech, everyone cares about cash. That's like paramount to everything else. Investors look at everything on a cash basis. We report on a cash basis. So as long if you're going to use hedging in a tech environment, it's really just for management of cash outlook.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yep.
And I'd like to pick your brains very quickly on the CFO space because the CFO space has changed a lot in the past 10 years. What I'd say more so definitely in the last 3 years since the implementation of AI and everything else. But you're working with a number of different customers. You've seen the changes over the years. Why is fractional work so popular now? And what's the benefits for both companies and CFOs?
Um, I think it's popular. I think it's popular because it's a function that can provide the same value add that a full-time individual would have been able to provide 3 years ago. And I think that's possible because the tech is so much better. The CFO doesn't need to be as involved as they would have had to have been a few years ago, right? You've got your your headcount platforms like Rippling and your AP platforms and cards platforms like Ramp and these new next gen ERPs and your RevRec automation, like all of this stuff that would have had to have been done manually or at least required a fair bit of manual intervention um, is largely automated now. So why pay someone a full-time CFO salary to do a bunch of low-level things, which is what would have been the case a few years ago, and
Mm.
then capitalize on like 5 to 10 hours a week of their kind of wisdom and strategic insight when you can effectively automate everything and just pay for that 5 to 10 hours at a reduced all-in cost, and not only like reduced all-in cost, but like just having FTEs is annoying. Eliminating that need as well. I think everyone kind of realizes that you can get all of like the true benefit from someone who has that background without having to like fully embed them in their organization. Um, and I also just think there's like a lot of really good people in the space right now who are kind of moving into similar roles and organizations as my own. That companies are like happy they can get the resources that they need on a fractional basis. I'll also say that like there are a lot of like larger firms that call themselves like fractional CFO firms that really just have like a bunch of controllers who don't really provide much value strategically. Um, I'd be wary of them. If you're a CFO and you're willing to work for a company that bills you out at like $200 an hour and you're earning less than that, you're probably not very good, to be honest. Um, so yeah, people should be careful of that. But yeah, it's just yeah, the tech is great and the talent is there. Why not do it? It's good for your company. You're spending less money and you're getting the benefit of someone who is pretty seasoned, who may even otherwise only consider it a full-time role in a much later stage organization.
Yeah, exactly. And more for, you know, it's brilliant to know the benefits from the company side, but I'd also like to know the benefits for you personally, right? Because I think sometimes you can get a little bit, if you're working as a CFO for a company for 5 years, it's brilliant. You can build a great relationships, but it can get a little bit tedious at times. Do you find managing your own time and basically being your own boss, what's the benefits to you for working with five or six or 50 different companies?
Yeah, lots of benefits. I mean, the obvious one is financial. So, when you're running your own shop, you don't have any overhead. And when you're working full time for a startup, the way your comp works is you have something that's probably 60% of what you would get paid at a later stage organization. And you're taking a bet on the upside of that company, right? If you're in tech and it's pre-IPO, your payoff is eventually will be acquired or will go public, and I'll be made whole for whatever shortfall I was earning versus a later stage company, and then some to be compensated for the risks that I'm taking. Um, I went full time for an early stage company very briefly after I left UiPath. I left UiPath after about a year post IPO. And I realized pretty early on in that full-time role that the company wasn't going to go anywhere for a whole host of reasons. I was also advising for a couple of other different earlier stage companies and was kind of arriving to the same conclusion. So initially, my strategy was, I just gone public with a company. It was great. Big party, lots of financial benefit. Uh, my strategy was I'm just going to go full time earlier stage. I'll take another one public. It'll be even better because I'll start earlier. If it doesn't work out, I'll do it at another one. If it doesn't work out, I'll do it at another one. One of them's bound to hit eventually. One thing I realized after like looking under the hood for a bunch of Series A and earlier companies is like you could do that for 20 of them and still none of them can be successful.
It's a
So
lottery.
it's a
That's
lot.
just, yeah, roll of the dice.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is like should have been obvious to me because that's the whole concept of venture capital in early stage investments is you invest in 20 companies and one of them carries your portfolio, four of them end up being okay, and then 15 of them don't exist in 5 years. Like
Yeah.
there's a reason that's the model because that's how that industry works. That's how Series A companies work. Um, so I realized like I couldn't put all my eggs in this early stage basket, and I took the plunge to do it full time. I started earning a lot more money than I was earning otherwise. Anecdotally, I'm getting equity in companies all the time anyway as an advisor, so I'm still getting upside, but for a much larger basket, which
Mm.
is great. And then at a personal level, I just anytime I've worked full time, I've been really interested for 6 months. I've fixed a bunch of stuff. I've had like massive impact. I convert my function into like something that's highly operational, and I get really bored and disengaged. And I just at a personal level, being pulled in a million different directions like constantly is just a better fit for how I operate.
Yeah.
And I'm just like a lot happier for it. Sometimes it's a little intense, like when half your clients have board meetings in the same week. It's like pretty terrible. But it is what it is. There's other weeks where it's the opposite, where it's like
Yeah.
pretty flex. It's definitely not for everyone. And I'm also like pretty good at BD. I have a really, really strong network. I've not struggled in generation of new business. Most finance people like probably don't fit that profile, so it's not for everyone. If you can't go and sell, then you shouldn't be doing this because you just won't be getting any business. But for me, it's just a good. It ticks like all the boxes.
Yeah, it's good to hear, because I think there's benefits to both sides personally and for companies. But I think from what I've seen, especially from other CFOs that I've talked to and people in my network, that it seems to be the go-to thing to do. And I think, it's not for everybody, right? Because I think you hit the nail on the head where you've got to have some kind of connection. You kind of have got to have customers lined up ready to go, because if you don't have that sales aspect about you, sometimes the clients aren't always going to be knocking on your door. You have to go and find them, which I think is also part and the
Yep.
parcel of the job.
Yeah, you absolutely have to go find them. They're not gonna just show up one day and say, "Hey, can you be my CFO, please?" That's just not how it works. So if you're not ready to hustle, then it's just not going to be successful for you.
Yeah, exactly that. And just
Yeah.
to finish off on a bit of a quick fire round, best finance book or podcast that you would recommend to others?
I wouldn't read something more interesting than finance. Read something about history or something that makes you laugh, or if you're working in finance all day, just find some other hobbies, please.
It's actually true, to be fair.
I would never in a million years read a book about finance. Sorry.
That's an amazing
Um,
answer. Amazing answer.
yeah. I mean, for podcasts, like it's not finance, but if you're gonna listen to something that's like businessy, Pivot is kind of the gold standard with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway. They've got great rapport. It's a little funny. They're both geniuses. It's pretty engaging, and they're very opinionated, which I like. Otherwise, listen to This American Life or Radio Lab or learn something else.
Yeah, exactly
Get a
that.
hobby.
Perfect.
Yeah.
If you weren't a CFO, what would you be doing? You think?
I don't know. I don't want to be a CFO at some point, so I should probably figure that out.
Yeah,
I'd probably be outside doing something, a mountain climber. So I love being out there in the wilderness. I love to cook, so maybe I'd open like a little restaurant or something like that. But definitely, I'd want to be active, but physically active, and just not at a desk.
yeah. I think that's the calling, right? I think even myself, when you're in an office for X amount of time, it does take its toll, and I think you do need to just go out there and explore a little bit, right, after time. But
Totally.
is that possible in New York? Have you got many? Have you got mountain ranges, the landscape for that, or would that be a travel?
I live in them. I live an hour north of the city, and there I can be on a mountain in 5 minutes.
Ah, wow.
And then the Catskills are a great little range, not another hour up or so. Yeah, there's loads. People get shocked. I'm 50 miles from Grand Central Station, and I'm surrounded by there's small mountains, but there's still mountains, and there's like good climbing, and it's pretty cool little spot
Yeah, it's a bit of an
for
eye-opener.
sure.
Even in our previous conversation, I said, you picture New York, you just picture Manhattan, and it's just buildings everywhere, but it's actually not the case. And
Yeah,
also, it's fairly similar to London, right? Because, even where we are in the city, an hour outside of that, you've got Kent, you've got lovely coastal areas, so it's just
sure.
maybe a bit of a reminder to everyone out there, just to not live in a city all the time and just look outside an hour outside of where you are. There's some amazing spots. And
Totally.
and lastly, the biggest risk that you've ever taken financially. Obviously, being starting the fractional role is going to be one of those.
Yeah, that would be the biggest one, for sure. And it's funny because it actually wasn't a risk. I just kind of made it out to be a risk, if that makes sense. So, uh, I've also like lived overseas and taken like gambles on jobs in different countries. And every time I take a risk, the first thing I realize I think especially for finance people who inherently think about risk, um, just take a jump, take a leap, do something different. It'll probably work out, and it'll probably work out for the better as an improvement to whatever situation you're currently in. Um, the hardest thing about making a risky decision is making the decision in the first place, and building up to that point where you make the decision. Every single time I've taken one of these gambles, almost immediately I've just said to myself, why didn't I just do that 3 years ago? Or like, oh, this is not as hard as I've effectively built it up to be. And, things just come easily. You just need to have confidence in yourself and kind of pull the trigger. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Go back to what you were doing before, right? But probably will work out if you have enough confidence in yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You have to take that leap and clear your mind of all negative thoughts. I think some people, especially if you're an overthinker, you kind of always think about the worst, right? But you need to remove that from your mind completely and just focus on exactly what you're good at.
Sure.
But Philip, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. And if there's anyone out there in the audience that are, from the conversations that we've had today that are interested in your services, what's the best way for somebody to reach out to you?
Sure. They can reach out to me through my website, which is lanegateadvisory.com, or just shoot me an email. It's Philip with one L at lanegateadvisory.com, or even reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's fine as well.
Perfect. That sounds like a plan. Well, again, Philip, thank you so much for your time. Make sure you enjoy the rest of your week, and I'm sure we'll speak again soon. Thank you so much.